Is it going to be the most prestigious, high-quality Siege in the world? No, but it doesn't need to be. And I'm so sick of that mentality of Siege having to be, right, this like perfect game and people watch it for the perfection and the art and the strategy and all this. It can be a glorified, fun, ranked event with the top players, the players that have the most pulse with social media, marketability. It would be a great event. Does it need to be long? Does it need to be a huge investment? No. Condense it down to like a 3-4 day LAN if you really have to. Limit the amount of nations that go. I think it would be a great fun event. It would really slot in so nicely in between stage 1, stage 2. People would be, excited about the game again instead of the subreddit being dead and people not really giving a flying about the esport program at the moment.
Will R6 Esports die? That is the question coming in for our second episode, Guzz. I guess time frame wise. Well, yeah, it'll probably die at some point, right?
Yeah.
At some point.
Eventually. Hopefully,
the sun is going
hopefully I die first.
The sun is going to envelop the planet and therefore R6 will die. Within the next 5 years, yes or no?
Well, what do you define as die?
Lack of investment, essentially. I think getting down to a point where you don't even necessarily have like big major events, SIs, majors.
Right.
Clearly Ubisoft are like, hey, we're going to scale things back dramatically.
So like not quite Gears of War dead, but for all intensive purposes, like on life support.
Yeah. Essentially.
5 years, no. I think the current path is relatively sustainable, provided things don't go absolutely insane. Obviously, the esports industry as a whole is not in the best of spots, and R6 is certainly not immune from that.
I feel like it's in the toilet at the moment, but yeah.
Time to apply for a real job. But I think it'll be okay. I think it has enough going for it, enough legs in it. Yeah.
I think so. I guess what I kind of look towards is that's within the next 5 years, but what about the next 5 years after that? Can it get to 10 years? And that's where I'm probably a little bit more unsure. I think the next 5 years, 100%. I just don't see it actually like getting down to the point where it's quote dead or dying, to be honest, because I don't think it's dying at the moment either. Obviously, there's sort of discussion points around why the conversation's really even being had. Clearly, there has been some kind of scale back for 2023, so therefore that brings into the discussion. It's a permutation. If something's being scaled back, then something could be potentially dying. Obviously, last year, 2022, we had a 3-stage format. It basically covered essentially the entire calendar year, whereas now for 2023, it's just the 2 stages. It's been a massive talking point. It's been a massive long break, and therefore it's got a lot of people asking, is R6 Esports dying?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that can probably be tied to the length of the break that we're currently in. I know that's a hot topic for discussion. Don't spill that on the mic. We're in the working 2 stages. You don't have to pay to replace that.
Nah, that's all right, mate. Just all over my hand.
So look, I think there is a reason to be concerned, but there's also plenty of arguments that can be made both on Ubisoft's end, player end, talent end, whatever, that 2 stages can have its benefits. And there are case studies, other games like Valorant, for instance, which at the moment seems to be doing quite well.
Yeah.
It has 2 stages. Apex. It's doing all right. Apex, maybe not the best case study.
Maybe not the best.
But it's still fine. Like, it's still okay. So is 2 stages, 1 step away from death? No. But it could be improved upon what we have now.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing for me as well with regards to 2 stages versus 3 stages, it's like, what can you add in the middle of it?
Yeah.
Because I think 3 stages, we saw it last year, as much as I love it, because obviously it's more work for us, it can get a little bit stale. It can probably lead to burnout. You're getting a lot of just the same stuff really repeated. It's all the same kind of league, 7 player days, yada, yada, yada. And it gets a little bit tiring, gets a little bit boring.
Yep.
And you see that really with kind of even sort of lack of viewership in terms of like once the packs are all done, everyone kind of just buggers off because it's all going to be just the same thing anyway. So I kind of like that. The fact that we're down to 2 stages means I think more people may be more interested in like, all right, we've had this massive break. I'm ready for Siege again. You know what I mean? So what can you do to probably at least fill the void? Because obviously we've had massive break.
We're in the middle of 3 months. So
it's been a big month. I think you got to have some third-party tournaments. You know, you kind of look at Japan and they got the 6 Invitational, things like that. That's what I would be looking for to kind of fill the void between a stage 1 and a stage 2. And I think it just gives a little bit more to calendar year. Every region can have their own. And I think that's something that should be looked into, hopefully for 2024 and beyond. Obviously,
Well, I mean,
2023 has gone by.
I mean, there is some stuff, right? We have like the Tier 2 circuit, NA, EU. Unfortunately, that didn't really filter down in any meaningful way to APAC or whatever you want to call it now in 2023. So I think there's been some efforts, but there are reasons likely behind why it does feel a little bit barren for this first year. You know, the fact that the Blast R6 deal sort of came together. There wasn't a huge amount of time to plan ahead for these sorts of things. Yeah. So the hope would be going forward that there is interest. Will there be from third parties realistically? It's so hard to say. I mean, esports could get huge investment over the next whatever, and yes, or it could see another downturn and we could be even quieter. So it's so hard to predict, but I agree with the sentiment that something needs to change for sure.
All right, we'll touch on that probably a little bit more and not too far, because I also want to get to the APAC shuffle, reshuffle, if you will, because it's been changed and chopped and whatnot quite a bit over the last couple of years, originally from Pro League, then towards the APAC South, APAC North system that we had, and I thought was always a pathway that I enjoyed. Evidently, issues arise with ping issues being the biggest issue, and obviously the lack of land. So therefore, I think in an ideal world, you have the APAC South, APAC North mono, but you have more lands that go with it. Unfortunately, that wasn't to be the case. And as we obviously see now, even though everything has been split up, there's still no lands for APAC. I don't see it as a necessary thing, though. And that's someone who obviously works within the region. I know a lot of people talk about, APAC, they need lands. And from the land, that's how you go to the major. And I kind of understand that thinking. I don't think that's illogical. But I also don't think it's necessarily that bad. Okay, Oceania, you get one spot. Japan, Korea, you get these slots. And as teams perform at the major, whether it's bad or whether it's good, maybe you kind of adjust the level that they have in terms of those slots. And I think you can tinker with that. The backlash that comes with that, though, is obviously a lot of people, especially on Reddit, have this absolute distaste for APAC at these big events. There's too many APAC teams. They're all garbage. And honestly, they're all pretty much fucking right. Like, most of the APAC teams are quite garbage. But while they're at the major, and obviously there's some other teams that didn't quite get to make the major from the stronger regions, they're only in that opening round. They're not quite getting the direct pathways, if you will. And so that first round that we had at Copenhagen essentially was a bit of a prelude more than anything. And yes, it was at the major, but let's be honest, the amount of APAC teams
if we're casting that phase of the major, it's not really that important.
Exactly. So that's the way I kind of look at that. I agree with that system that we've actually sort of come to. I don't necessarily mind more APAC teams getting to go and compete at these majors in the early portion rounds. Hopefully it improves them. If it improves them, then we have a better product. We have a better product in APAC. And R6 Esports probably doesn't die. So that's the way
APAC is the heart to R6 Esports.
Honestly, it all comes around full circle. You are not going to have an R6 Esports ecosystem that is only NA and EU and Brazil.
I mean, I feel like you could to an extent. And
you can have it. I don't think it'd be as good if it's a global system.
And I think we've had this probably discussion multiple times. I know I'm a pretty big advocate for it. APAC still, for Siege, is a ridiculously under-tapped market compared to, the Riot ecosystem, for example, right? Huge markets in Valorant already in India, huge markets in the likes of, Bangladesh as well, huge population. China, that 1 billion people right there, you tap into 0.01% of that, boom, you've got the whole fucking region already. So there's a lot I think that can be done in terms of reshuffling the reshuffle of the reshuffle of the recycled, reverting whatever system.
That's a lot of shuffling
to improve
going on
it.
Right now, that's all I'm saying.
But at its core, I don't see a LAN as essential. I do, though, see it as a tool to improve the quality of the region, to improve fan engagement and marketability in the region. Again, comparing it to Valorant, again, that's probably taking away market share from Siege at the moment. So I do see it as, again, not essential, but it would be an improvement. And if you have a system in which APAC teams, let's say all whatever slots it is at the moment that go to the major, that instead goes into an APAC LAN, you can filter out more of the shit teams that aren't going to do anything at the major anyway at that event, and then give maybe one slot back to NA, one to EU, however you want to do it. Creates a system that's arguably more equitable on a global scale and is better for APAC as a sub-region. At the end of the day, though, what does it come down to? Money. Holding these events is not cheap. We're not going to sit here and pretend that Ubisoft need to hold more APAC LANs. It's really not that bad. This shit costs millions of dollars per year of investment.
Putting on an APAC LAN is essentially like putting on a major.
Yeah, it's
Close
crazy.
to it. Not probably the exact same logistical numbers, but the whole breakdowns and the manpower as well is almost probably akin to it. It's never going to happen. One thing that I do like from these changes, the system overall really that we've got is the open system. Obviously, we can kind of praise that a little bit and say it is good that is the case. It's not closed circuit. It's not invite only. You don't have to necessarily go through scrims and get noted. Like, you can literally just make a team, play on the bracket, and then obviously make your way through in towards the league and from their majors and SI. So open system, good. I also think where the APAC region is at the moment is, I think, pretty good. I like the fact that we've got teams getting direct invites. It actually helps with orgs because they don't have to worry as much about like, oh, you got to go through this loophole, then you got to go through that loophole, then you got to win this LAN, and then you can maybe go. Yeah. You just get to go. You get that kind of air time, which is really good. They'll play the early stages of the majors. It is what it is. And now obviously kind of bringing it back a little bit to that sort of long break, because that's been a pretty big talking point from the bits and pieces that I've seen, at least on Reddit, both at the start of the break and really now towards the end of the break as well, as we come kind of towards the end of it.
Come towards the, well, I mean, we're still got a month to go.
Exactly.
It's towards the back end, but it's still a long time.
That's the thing. I feel like we're getting towards the end of it. I can see light.
I don't know if I don't even know what Siege looks like from a top-down view.
And there's still an entire month to go. Is it too long? Firstly, the break that we've had.
Maybe ask me again for the Stage 2 preview in 30 days, and I'll give you a better answer to that. It's so hard. I think, yes, it is too long. How do you reshuffle it in such a way to distribute the breaks so that it isn't 3 months long? I mean, it might be doable, but I think, again, it's just supplementing it with something. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a bit, but yeah, 90 days plus, especially if you didn't even attend the major, it's almost 120 days or whatever. Yeah, that is a really, really long time.
It's a very, very long time for those that, and obviously we got to be a part of Copenhagen as well. Imagine we didn't even get to do that. Suddenly that really does draw that window to a really dangerous level. It's quite alarming how much time really has passed. Obviously we already drew some comparisons to Valorant. Apex Legends, obviously, I brought up. There is sort of the Counter-Strike model, but I think it's very different. I think Counter-Strike is quite unique in their approach. I'm not too sure if Siege is going to be able to follow suit. I think it goes back to sort of what I said before is you need to have something in between. It doesn't have to be its own stage. It doesn't have to be a replica of Stage 1, Stage 2. So we go back to the Stage 3 system that we had last year. As I said, Japan kind of has their Japan Invitational. It's big. The Japan teams play against the Japan teams. Those things are logistically kind of easy to put on. Why can't they put on like an EU LAN, for example, that's kind of a good showcase of those EU teams? Everyone talks about at these majors, oh, we love the EU teams, the Brazil teams, the NA teams. Why not showcase those teams maybe a little bit more? You could do like an intercontinental one. You could do like NA and EU LAN potentially. Yeah. Brazil, LATAM. Like you can probably do enough, I think, between stages 1 and 2 that it's not like it's massive. It's not a hold stage in itself, and it may not give SI points because obviously that's not part of the open circuit. And that's the whole point of SI points and getting to the majors. It's its own individual thing. Every region gets something. Look at Oceania. You can do something with Rect. You can put on a gauntlet or whatever, and that can then therefore get a bit of backing. Every region can do it, and I think that's probably my best solution to it. And then that way it also doesn't inundate the viewers too much that they get that burnout. It's short, it's sweet, it's in the middle. It breaks down the overall gap from 4 or 5 months or whatever the hell it is. And at least there's something in between.
Yeah, and I don't think it has to be on any grand scale, right? It doesn't need to be like some 4-week league or whatever. It could be something as simple as a weekend LAN. I guess the big caveat to that would be what would players, orgs, etc. think about that? Because, I mean, the discussion was players were advocating and giving feedback that they wanted more and or longer breaks. Are they happy at the length? I don't know. I'm not a player, so I'm just some pleb. I have no idea. Maybe they love this 3-month break, whatever. And if they do, and if that's what the majority of what they want and what other stakeholders want, I mean, so be it.
Well, the audience is a large stakeholder, right? You don't have anything without any kind of viewership or audience. And for those watching, we're very much keen to hear your thoughts, again, in the comments or either on Patreon, which gives access to our Discord, wherever, Twitter, you name it. Let us know, because I think, and obviously even on Reddit, it's already been a large discussion. Are you happy with it? You're not happy with it? How do you think it can be potentially fixed as well? I think that's definitely important to get feedback from all angles. And I'm kind of hoping, this is maybe on a sort of individual level, that Blast, Ubisoft are trying to find ways to get that feedback. I haven't personally seen it myself, like on a public level. I haven't seen them sort of reach out and say, what do people want to see? I'm hoping that does happen some way or another, some sort of survey, some kind of shout out, any way to kind of get people's thoughts on what they want to see, whether they really do just want to see another whole stage, so that there is 3 stages. Do they want to see invitational events? Do they want to see World Cups? Like, do they want to see some kind of like almost carnival atmosphere tournament where some teams get to come, but not all teams, and it's not an open circuit? So
wait, World Cup? Do you mean the event that got announced just before a very unfortunate global pandemic and then we never heard from again? Surely not.
Yeah, I mean, look, honestly, we could probably lead straight into that, to be honest, because it's a good talking point.
No, we've got it written down.
I mean, we do have it written down.
Well, I wrote it down.
You're
lazy.
Yeah, I brought it up though in the podcast. That's the main thing. It's a good talking point, because obviously, again, for me, having history in PUBG, we have essentially what is known as the PUBG Nations Cup. Very, very much a prominent event on the calendar for PUBG Esports. It's probably the most loved tournament, even more than the PUBG World Championship, which is akin to 6 Invitational. So, I mean, that's quite something. And when I kind of look at the way that it's done, and every time you see the flags and the countries and all the players, you also get to see that almost like fantasy world where certain players are playing with each other that are on different teams. And I think that's something that Siege could definitely benefit from. Imagine like a couple players from Bliss, a couple players from Wildcard, maybe the best player from a Circular Spheres, for example, for Team Australia, because there typically, at least for these events, are limits to it. You don't just send like a team of 5. There has to be some kind of limit. I think for Siege it would be like 2 max per team, for example, just so one team doesn't just completely dominate it.
Yep.
And I think you can have a lot of fun with it, and that's the way it would need to be. At least that's the way I think it should be. Fun. It doesn't need to be SI. It doesn't need to be a major.
Yep.
Let it breathe. Let it be a little bit of fun. And I think obviously the players that get to go, they should obviously get a lot out of it. There should be that prize pool. There should be a reason to want to go outside of just the travel. The biggest thing is, what do the orgs get out of it? Well, not a lot, honestly. That's the biggest detriment to these things. PUBG Nations Cup, there's no org involvement, essentially, at all, because it is well and truly nations. So does this mean the orgs would kick back on it?
Just get their governments to back them, send them on diplomatic missions. No, I'll get into that in a second. I just want to take a step back. I think the World Cup, maybe this is an exaggeration, but I think it could single-handedly really bridge the gap between the casual and the pro community of Siege, because 8 years now, it has been fragmented. The casual and the ranked community alone, the stats were published, is already fragmented enough. I was shocked. I think it's like 40% of the player population plays ranked, maybe even less. I think it spiked with rank 2.0, but it is low. So that's already a minority in the community, even playing the most competitive mode available outside of comp. You shred that number again, you've got the amount of people playing the game competitively and arguably the amount watching it. An event like the World Cup instantly in my mind springs the Overwatch World Cup, which obviously you would have been following at the time you casted Overwatch. Yep. I think of the XQCs. That is still a huge storyline that's brought up and is still, prominent in his community and the Overwatch community. It's storylines like that I think can be really, really exciting. Is it going to be the most prestigious, high-quality Siege in the world? No, but it doesn't fucking need to be. And I'm so sick of that mentality of Siege having to be, right, this like perfect game and people watch it for the perfection and the art and the strategy and all this bullshit. It can be a glorified, fun, ranked event with the top players, the players that have the most pulse with social media, marketability. It would be a great event. Does it need to be long? Does it need to be a huge investment? No. Condense it down to like a 3-4 day LAN if you really have to. Limit the amount of nations that go. I think it would be a great fun event. It would really slot in so nicely in between stage 1, stage 2. People would be, excited about the game again instead of the subreddit being dead and people not really giving a flying fuck about the esport program at the moment.
I think
Did I go in too hard?
I think that might be our cold open for this episode. Honestly, that was brutal. That was honest, and that was no bullshit. That's what we like here. But I agree wholeheartedly with you on that. I think that again, not everything has to be about the pinnacle of like, oh, this is the best siege, right? Fuck the best siege. I mean, Red Northception was not the best siege. It was still entertaining at the Copenhagen.
Look, I know we
Nature.
casted it, but it was probably quite literally one of the more entertaining games during that entire phase. Like,
entertaining, maybe not for all of the right reasons, but it was still entertaining nevertheless. And I think that's something you can get out of a World Cup. Yeah, you're not going to have the same synergy levels that you're going to see from those top teams, but I think you can still end up in a situation where you get some good siege. A lot of the top players are still going to be playing it anyway, right? Because like realistically, if it's a World Cup, the best players are there. That's the whole point of it. However they kind of get in, there's many different metrics as to voting, either decided by...
I think they had like a manager system that was originally tabled.
I think so. At the moment, the way that PUBG Nations Cup does it, for reference, is it's a player vote.
Right.
From within your own region, you put the player vote to that region. So for Team Australia, it would be the Oceania League. All the players would put together a vote. Obviously, you have a cap, 2 per team, and that's how it gets sorted out. And that's why it is by the players, for the players, and then in turn, hopefully, for the viewers.
I mean, not to harp on too much, but you have a system like that, then you have the players that aren't even attending the event that would be genuinely engaged. They would give a shit about this. You have watch parties, you have engagement. Yeah, they'd care about it to an extent. Obviously, not as much as those that are in attendance, but yeah, I think it would have a really nice flow-on effect. And look, you mentioned the orgs, and what do they get out of this? And unfortunately, esports is a small world, walls talk. There seemed to have been a lot of pushback from orgs when this event was proposed. Is that why it got sent to the grave? I have no idea. It was probably more so to do with the pandemic and other investments and whatever. Yeah. But that was really disappointing to hear. I get it. Your org's name and brand and the sponsors associated with that may not be prevalent on the broadcast or on the socials or whatever. But the opportunity that this kind of event provides to build up your players, which is something that is so incredibly overlooked by 99% of orgs that whinge about this shit anyway, I think is critical. And I think it is very, very short-sighted and plays into the short-sighted mentality of esports for orgs to write this off and say, well, our branding isn't on this. We don't want this. We want our players to scrim for 3 months straight. That would be better.
I agree. I don't know how it gets done. I don't know.
A lot of political willpower from Ubisoft.
and the reason why I say that is because if you are to do it, it already probably needs to be in the planning for next year.
Oh, for sure.
Because it's still a big event. There's a lot that has to go into it.
Maybe they'll just tune into this podcast and be like, yeah, we should add that to next year's calendar.
Someone at Blast or Ubisoft.
If the World Cup gets re-announced next week, we better be casting it.
And I agree. It doesn't have to be a long spectacle. Typically these kind of things.
How long's Nations Cup?
Like 3 days.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, maybe Siege is a bit different because
obviously you don't have
a couple more teams, needs eliminations, yada yada yada, right? So, and another part of it is how many teams do we even invite? That's actually one thing that's typically controversial. What countries actually get invited? How many do you have?
Do qualifiers and stuff. They do that for Overwatch. Just do it here. Done.
You could. How do you do the qualifiers? I guess are you saying like in Europe? European countries all play.
Yeah, I mean, you could. I don't know if there needs to be a limit as to what countries can play in an open qualifier, but you have some kind of system where those teams are created and compete.
I think that,
and you have some that have direct invites where the most popular countries are. Done.
Well, the issue with that is then, let's be honest, because you're not going to be putting on an APAC LAN. Japan gets an auto invite, Korea gets an auto invite, Australia probably gets an auto invite, right? And so you kind of end up in this situation. Then it's like, well, why does certain teams from EU not get auto invites? Why do we have to play in these qualifiers? So look, that's
we just rank it on most popular.
There's definitely ways to do it. I will say
where the game is played.
We probably don't have enough time or honestly even knowledge about it, but there are ways to actually understand which regions.
We'll work on our notes before we pitch that to the CEO of Ubisoft.
We'll send that one off.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of, basically, I guess how to improve R6 Esports. Next topical conversation here, and really flows on nicely. I'd say this podcast is.
I planned this one well, didn't I, Jakey?
You've done a good job with this one. It's all planned beautifully. Obviously, we've touched on sort of the break and how things can be somewhat improved there within the game itself, though.
Right.
improvements. And I like the fact that you've got sort of in-game menu. This is something that Valorant themselves are just bringing out now, is their new esports menu. Siege just feels like it's completely behind the 8 ball. Even PUBG did this like 2-3 years ago. I mean, like, this needs to be in tomorrow. No, yesterday even.
Yeah. Was PUBG the first? I mean, it's the first that springs to mind for me. There's probably some other obscure examples, but
like, I feel like, well,
arguably CS has had
even
it.
Counter-Strike to a degree,
For the
right,
majors.
has had something, even if it's just like a watch tab.
Yeah.
And
Plus
so I think,
Pick-Ems.
But
I mean, sorry.
no, CS definitely before PUBG.
And I think, look, that leans into the point nicely. It's not necessarily just having, some menu to look at a schedule. Like, that doesn't create engagement. I'm thinking much more large scale with this, right? You have Pick-Ems, you have fantasy, you have all this kind of shit, again, to bridge the gap between your average Joe, who may not even play ranked, who sees this in that game and goes, hey, this is kind of cool. I could maybe, earn some credits or some packs or whatever, gets engaged, then watches the game, then it plays the game more, then one day aspires to be competitive. And that's a very naive mindset. That's only going to be the 0.001% where that ever happens. But it creates engagement, which the esport for the longest time has struggled with. And that starts in game. And look, don't get me wrong. Something like this would take God knows how much money to develop, and needs to be continually developed and needs to be updated. So it's a big task.
Not necessarily. So in PUBG, for those unaware, there is actually a fantasy league. It's run by a company called Twire.
So third party.
It is a third party, but it has integration with PUBG because they've been... First, they innovated it, they made it, they did it, and then after everyone started playing it and it became popular, eventually PUBG was like, okay, well, we'll just feature it on our broadcast and we'll show the talent and who they've picked for their teams and how they're doing and the points accumulated. It's honestly, I don't believe it would be that difficult to actually do. And honestly, all it would probably take is for, say, a Ubisoft or a Blast to reach out to someone like a Twire and be like, hey, can you do this for our game? We'll feature it. We'll, obviously it'll take some funding and whatnot, and they'll have to get API access. But
I mean, not to butt in too much. I'm sort of trying to make the differentiation behind having like a dedicated esports fully fledged tab in the game, which would take all the UI development, all that shit, all that integration. A third party thing like that for fantasy. Oh, fuck yeah, that's pretty simple and straightforward. It's a shame now that, like companies like Siege GG have gone under, because that would have been such a great example to have that kind of integration and connection that already pre-existed with Ubi. But I think third-party examples that maybe aren't super directly integrated into the the client itself, would be good.
It's difficult, I think, because having seen the website that Twire's created and how in depth it is, it's a lot to probably go into a client.
Yeah.
So I mean, at that point, then I would almost envision almost like a sort of link in the client that can actually go to a website. At that point, what's the difference between a Ubisoft website or, say, Twire as a licensed partner that can get, their name out there? So, look, regardless of how you do it, I think we're both in agreement. Things like fantasy certainly would bring a very fun aspect to Siege.
I think
the basics as well, watch tabs and schedules and all of that. It just should be well and truly in there.
At the end of the day, to put it simply, there needs to be more of a way to onboard and engage people in the esports program outside of people that are already in it. Because I think at the moment, the program does an okay job at sort of giving the people that are already there watching it what they want. But it's about bringing in new people and seeing growth. And if you have literally nothing in the game outside of maybe the occasional tab on news, which I feel was dropped off in stage 1. I never really saw them unless I wasn't playing the game enough or whatever. Even if the most basic thing like that is not being executed, then I just don't understand how new people are going to be introduced to the game outside of, content creators.
Yeah, no, I agree. So, yeah, I mean, events obviously have been spoken about. I touched on the Japan Invitational, along with the fact that you've got potentially World Cup that could be reintroduced. So we're talking about sort of how to improve R6 Esports. I feel like we've touched on those. APAC LANs, again, I don't really think that you can logistically...
Cherry on top.
It would be a pretty big fucking cherry. I'm not gonna lie, like that's ridiculous at that point. And I think the only world in which that actually ends up happening, eventuating, is if everything else has successfully been implemented. Your proper fantasy leagues and tabs and everything else, and the ecosystem's thriving.
And we beat Overwatch, not Overwatch, Valorant.
I'd hope we can beat Overwatch at this point. They're pretty dead. The other one as well. third-party support, license changes, and being able to have more grassroots tournaments, absolutely vital. It's one of the bigger things missing at the moment. You think about the fact that Tier 2 is essentially just evaporated. How do you get into Tier 1? You can't really necessarily compete with these Tier 1 teams if you're on that open circuit. Grassroots is absolutely essential to a thriving ecosystem in terms of improving R6 Esports. That needs to probably almost be main focus number one, maybe even over any potential in-game menu.
I mean, and this is a big discussion, I think, that's being taken or being had in the industry as a whole, especially when it comes to publisher-backed esports. You look at Valorant as an example. I know there was a bit of chat recently. The head of esports basically came out and said, if T2 could hold itself, we would have it. But I just don't think that publishers see the value in it because it's probably too long-term. Because what short-term advantages do you get from piling money into these leagues? I mean, the answer's none. You bleed money in the hope that you onboard, new fans and new players into the scene. But again, it's something that sort of is catered to people already there, a very small fraction of the community. So whilst I wish T2 could be living and thriving and having a great time, at the end of the day, how do you, as someone working on the budget at Ubisoft, go to your boss and say, we want to spend X amount on a Tier 2 league that's going to get X amount of viewership?
Yeah.
You just can't. Like, that's the harsh reality of this discussion. That said, it can be remedied, and we saw those improvements made to the way in which the licenses were sort of formulated sometime last year. I can't remember exactly when, to theoretically make it a smoother pathway for third parties to come in of whatever scale to host their own Ubisoft esports events, Siege or otherwise.
Yep.
So that's probably the path that makes the most sense from Ubisoft's perspective, the path that was taken. Hopefully we actually see some results from that. And I mean, we have locally to some extent with the Rect events, for instance. I think they've been a great success, and hopefully other regions follow suit and see value themselves.
A part of that as well, especially more so when we've got a little bit more experience with Rect and their events, especially the gauntlets, being able to get sponsorships.
It's tough.
It's not easy, but also if you allow these tournaments, here's the licenses, you can use just about the majority of sponsorships that you want. It's not like there's that many at the moment for R6 and the higher levels. So you've got the pick of the bunch.
Do we want to chat about sponsor views? Because Ubisoft have a official stance that they will not permit gambling sponsors, alcohol sponsors, etc.
Does it improve
of that light?
R6?
I mean, EA is similar with Apex, so it's not like Ubisoft are like trying to be the lone soldier and be like, hey, we're really good, look how brand friendly we are. It is consistent across many publishers. I would assume Riot is probably similar to some extent. I don't think I've ever seen drinking or gambling sponsors on their streams, but I mean, that if you want Tier 2, then you're probably gonna have to make concessions in other ethical grounds or whatever, because that's where the money for that kind of stuff is going to come from.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I think that, is there a precedent for it? You look at kind of like Counter-Strike, and they're a little bit more open to it, probably just the nature of their game.
Yep.
They got case openings, right? So it's kind of in it.
Gamble.
Yeah, and it's a little bit more ingrained, I think, in the culture of Counter-Strike, in that esport.
Yeah.
And it's obviously not as prevalent in a lot of other esports, which try to go for a bit more of that clean look. Typically, probably to do with the publishers themselves. As we know, obviously, Valve are extremely hands-off when it comes to Counter-Strike. So they're probably not too fast. It doesn't really bother them. And at this point, clearly, it makes them a lot of money. It obviously works for them. So as long as that keeps on ticking, I don't think they'll care. But for Siege to now go ahead and say, okay, we'll allow esports betting, we'll promote it on the streams, that'll bring an influx of money.
Oh, for sure.
Is that going over the top? Does it maybe harm the image versus the income, the revenue that you get from it? I honestly don't know. I'm a mixed bag on it. And probably in the past, I've been more for these kind of things. Gambling, is not obviously a great thing, but
it is when you win.
If it's going to pay the bills, right, then realistically, it's something that is done in traditional esports just about everywhere. It's a human nature thing.
I mean, it's done in traditional sports everywhere. Gambling in general is outside of TV rights revenue is fucking huge. So, you know, we're obviously conceding a large part of a potential pie in blocking out those forms of investment.
Brand image versus money.
But it's such a difficult discussion to have. It's probably one that has been taken place.
Oh, you would
behind
imagine.
the scenes, probably ongoing.
Yeah.
But
what do you lose by going down that path? Is it harder to secure certain venues, events? Can you do this in certain countries? Is this an issue in Japan or Korea? You know, it's not as easy as just allow gambling sites and make lots of money. It's not that simple. It's not that easy, and it probably could have some negative effects. So, does that fix R6? Not necessarily. At least not straight away. Not that easy. I think there's other avenues. Grassroots tournaments. In-game menu. You go down.
Give me Pick-Ems. I want my diamond coin.
Yeah, like diamond charm.
Yes, please.
You've literally got the charm system in game, like that. You
have a drop system. Surely integrate with Twitch if you can't integrate it in the game to have Pick-Ems. I don't know.
How hard is it to have like you do your Pick-Ems, you do the major, and from there you get a certain, I guess it would be like the Copenhagen logo or whatever, for that major, and it would have a different color depending on your tier, and that would be your charm. Is that hard? I don't think that's very difficult to implement. It's fun.
Look, again,
and maybe you just say it's like $4.99.
Obviously, to reiterate, we know absolutely nothing about game development, so integrating something like that could be super expensive and annoying and difficult and take away from other aspects of the game. So
it could be. Honest opinion, I don't think it is. Truthfully. Again, it could be though, and I could be completely off the mark. I'd love to hear, again, if people's thoughts on it, if that's something that they would like, if that's something they think would actually
Would you spend
cool.
$5 for Pick-Ems?
Like
I
legitimately, would you spend, we'll say $5 just for the simplicity, would you spend $5 for Pick-Ems and you get a charm that obviously changes its variation color based on how good you did?
Or something to that effect,
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that, but yeah.
So something to sort of keep in mind. These are just little things that you can add up, and eventually a game just goes from a little bit average to, hey, it's got all the bells and whistles that a lot of other esports titles have. We'll begin to probably wrap this one up. We don't necessarily need to go too much into the political side of things. It gets a little.
Probably did too much already.
Yeah, it gets a little bit stale. Fortunately, this one's not already too long. We do like to keep things relatively short and sweet around this sort of time frame anyway. And I think we hit some really good points. And unfortunately, what is some pretty topical conversations, especially regarding the long breaks, the format changes. It does hit close to home, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are pretty disappointed with how things have potentially turned out and how they maybe think that it could obviously
or they completely disagree, in which case, again, we super encourage people to engage, whether you agree, disagree.
Yep.
As long as you're not a dickhead and completely disrespectful in the way that you share your opinions,
if
we really
you are
don't
a dickhead, we have a Patreon. You can obviously send us your money and be a dickhead with us exclusively behind the scenes, where you get some extra content of us being dickheads, and we can all be dickheads together.
Lots more swearing and naughty stuff happens there. We are not lying.
And it also helps you, you can get in touch, the Discord and all of that.
We don't have Pick-Ems though.
We don't have Pick-Ems. We don't have Pick-Ems, but you can obviously chat more directly with us. There's Q&As that we can do, both on the stream and off stream. So again, to any and all patrons, it's very much appreciated. You get a little bit more from us. Couple of
maybe by this episode they'll be like waterfalling.
Yeah, maybe. Again, that's still the plan.
We'll see.
At
Hopefully,
this point, you just be liking to highlight that. Everyone will get shout outs. Pick a name, say a name, something like that.
Maybe
pick a name, any name. All right. Well, that's going to be us done for this episode. 3 episodes in, we're doing a good job, guys.
We haven't given up yet.
We haven't given up yet, and hopefully we can continue this one. Not too far away, obviously, from stage 2. So I guess stay tuned, and we'll be back soon. So bye.
Bye.
Yep. Cool. Awesome.